Vincent Torino's biggest mistake didn't happen in a dark alley or during some bad deal. It happened at a charity event at the Beverly Hills Hotel in March of 1978. About 500 well-dressed guests were there, raising money when Torino, drunk and trying to impress his friends, walked up to Maggie Johnson. She was there on behalf of her husband, Clint Eastwood. Eastwood was filming a movie in Arizona and had asked Maggie to attend for him. Torino had ties to the Genovese crime family in New York, but had moved to Los Angeles in the early 1970s. He ran a few nightclubs and some gambling operations. Nothing huge, but enough to make him think he mattered. While Maggie stood at the bar, Torino came up behind her and grabbed her around the waist. She pulled away and told him she was married to Clint Eastwood. Torino laughed and reached for her again. She told him firmly not to touch her. Another guest's husband stepped in, and hotel security started heading their way. Torino turned back to Maggie, called her an insult, and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Security dragged Torino out of the event. Inside, people rushed to Maggie, bringing ice and asking if she was okay. She said she was fine and went home without calling Clint, not wanting to interrupt him while he was working. But before she even got home, 3 people had already called Eastwood in Arizona. One of them was producer Robert Daly, who told him exactly what had happened. Eastwood listened quietly, asked if Maggie was all right, and then asked who did it. When Daly said the man was Vincent Torino, a mob-connected figure, Eastwood ended the call and sat in silence. Maggie called about 20 minutes later and tried to play it down. Eastwood told her he was coming home. She told him to stay and finish filming. He said he'd be back the next day. Eastwood then called Eddie Russo, a man from New Jersey who understood organized crime. Russo had moved to Los Angeles in the 1960s and handled security for studios and actors. Eastwood had used him before for quiet background checks and sensitive work. When Eastwood explained what happened, Russo said he knew Torino, a small-time Genovese guy who ran some clubs. Eastwood asked for everything: where Torino lived, where he worked, and who he answered to. Russo said he'd have the details by morning. Eastwood flew back to Los Angeles the next day. When he got home around noon, he saw a deep purple bruise on Maggie's cheek. She tried to brush it off. He asked if she had gone to the police. She said hotel security had taken a statement, but didn't think anything would come of it because of Torino's connections. Eastwood asked her to stay with her sister for a few days while he dealt with things. When she asked what he planned to do, he told her it wouldn't be anything reckless, but said she needed to be somewhere safe. She packed and left later that afternoon. Eddie Russo showed up at 6 that evening with a full report. Vincent Torino was 42 years old, born in Newark, and had served 5 years in prison for assault in the 1960s. He moved to Los Angeles in 1972 and ran 3 clubs in Hollywood. 2 were legitimate. 1 hosted illegal card games and sports betting. He answered to Anthony Scalia, known as Tony Baggs, the Genovese captain in Los Angeles who controlled most of the family's West Coast operations. Torino was one of about 20 men under him. Russo also gave Eastwood Torino's home address, a house in Brentwood worth around $500,000. Torino made an estimated $200,000 to $300,000 annually from his clubs and gambling operations. He was divorced, had no children, lived alone, and had a girlfriend who wasn't around often. After reviewing the file, Eastwood asked Russo if he knew anyone who did concrete work. When Russo asked why, Eastwood said he needed a concrete box made, large enough to fit a person, but empty. The next day, the box was ready at a warehouse in Van Nuys. It measured 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet deep with thick walls and an open top. Eastwood instructed Russo to have it delivered to Torino's house that night after dark, dropped on his driveway directly in front of his garage. He handed Russo a folded note to place at the bottom of the box. The note read, "Next time, it won't be empty." Russo warned Eastwood this was a threat against a connected individual who could retaliate. Eastwood said he understood and that Maggie wasn't home. He was. At 2 in the morning, 3 men Russo knew drove a flatbed truck to Torino's house. They used a forklift to place the concrete box in front of his garage, blocking both doors. They left the note inside and departed. Torino discovered the box at 8 the next morning. He had to lean far into it to retrieve the note. After reading it, he called Anthony Scalia, who arrived an hour later with 2 other men. When Scalia asked who sent it, Torino initially claimed not to know. Under questioning, he admitted he'd gotten drunk and argued with a woman at a party a few nights earlier, that he might have grabbed and slapped her. When Scalia pressed for details, Torino said someone mentioned she was married to Clint Eastwood. Scalia's response was immediate. He told Torino he was an idiot and that they now had a serious problem. When Torino suggested he could handle Eastwood, Scalia grabbed him and explained that the family had an understanding with movie stars. They're untouchable. Torino had broken that understanding. Scalia ordered him to find Eastwood and apologize, and to pray the apology was accepted. When Torino refused, Scalia said the family wouldn't back him or protect him. Torino had created the mess and would have to fix it alone. Torino spent 3 days trying to arrange a meeting. No one wanted to help. On the 4th day, he couldn't sleep and was visibly deteriorating. On the 5th day, Scalia called with news that a meeting had been arranged at Griffith Park Observatory parking lot the following day at 3 o'clock. Torino arrived early. At 3 exactly, Eastwood pulled up alone in a Mercedes. They stood about 10 feet apart. Torino apologized, explaining he'd been drunk and hadn't known who Maggie was. Eastwood pointed out that being drunk didn't excuse putting hands on his wife, grabbing her, insulting her, and hitting her in front of 500 people. He said Torino was apologizing out of fear, not genuine remorse. When Torino asked what Eastwood wanted, Eastwood said he wanted Torino to understand how serious he was. If Torino touched his wife again, came near his family, or even spoke their names, the box wouldn't be empty next time. Torino bristled, reminding Eastwood of his connections. Eastwood said he didn't care and had his own connections. He pointed out that nobody would care if Torino disappeared, but Eastwood was a recognizable public figure. He asked Torino who would win that conflict. Eastwood then handed Torino a folder containing IRS paperwork on his clubs, the real numbers, versus what Torino reported. The difference was approximately $200,000 annually in unreported income. Eastwood said his lawyer held a copy. If Torino came near his family, that information would go to federal authorities. Eastwood provided specific details. Torino's accountant was Bernard Stoltz, who kept 2 sets of books, one for Torino, one for the IRS. The real books were kept in a safe in Stoltz's office. The combination was 1834-22. Torino's phone rang. It was Scalia, telling him to agree to whatever Eastwood wanted and end it immediately. Torino agreed to stay away from Eastwood and his family. Eastwood left. 2 weeks passed quietly. Maggie returned home, her bruise faded, and life returned to normal. Eastwood believed the matter was resolved. It wasn't. Torino couldn't accept that he'd been forced to back down. He began investigating how Eastwood obtained the financial documents and discovered Eddie Russo's involvement. Torino sent 3 men to Russo's office. They broke his arm and told him to warn Eastwood to stay out of mob business. Russo called Eastwood from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Eastwood arrived as police were taking Russo's statement. After they left, Eastwood's phone rang. It was Anthony Scalia, demanding an immediate in-person meeting at Griffith Park. When Eastwood arrived, Scalia was already there with 3 men. Scalia said Torino was gone. He'd left town, left the business, left everything. He showed Eastwood that day's newspaper, a small article about an IRS raid on one of Torino's clubs and an investigation into the owner. Scalia accused Eastwood of sending the papers to federal authorities as threatened. Eastwood denied it, but he knew Eddie Russo had sent them as retaliation for his broken arm. Scalia said it didn't matter who sent them. Torino was finished. The family was cutting ties. An IRS investigation meant FBI scrutiny, which put everyone connected to Torino at risk. Torino would disappear to somewhere federal authorities couldn't find him. Scalia clarified that the family didn't want conflict with Eastwood. They preferred the existing arrangement where each side stayed out of the other's business. Torino had violated that arrangement and was paying for it. Scalia asked if they had an understanding. Eastwood agreed. Scalia asked what Russo was owed for his injuries. Eastwood said Russo didn't want money. He just wanted to be left alone. Scalia agreed and said Russo was now off limits. He called it their apology. 3 days later, Torino's clubs were shut down. The IRS seized everything and found exactly what the documents had shown: 2 sets of books and years of unreported income. Torino was indicted and faced 20 years. He accepted a plea deal for 5 years and entered witness protection afterward. Rumors placed him somewhere in the Midwest under a new identity. His operation was destroyed, his reputation ruined, his connections severed, all because he'd slapped a woman at a party and couldn't control himself. Eastwood told Maggie only that Torino had moved away and the family had handled it. Eddie Russo never discussed the details and returned to work after his arm healed. The concrete box remained in Torino's driveway for 3 months until the bank foreclosed on the house. The new owners had it broken up and removed. The story circulated in both mob and Hollywood circles. It became an account of what happened when a connected individual assaulted Clint Eastwood's wife and disappeared 6 months later. The concrete box, the note, the parking lot meeting, the IRS raid, all illustrations of what occurs when someone mistakes silence for weakness. Eastwood never raised his voice, never threw a punch, never made direct threats. He sent a box, had a conversation, and allowed Torino's own actions to destroy him. Torino reportedly lives in a small Ohio town, now under a different name, working at a hardware store. He's divorced, alone, and drinks heavily. Occasionally, people recognize him not as Vincent Torino, but as someone who used to be somebody. He never explains what happened. He works his shifts and returns to an empty apartment, thinking about a party in March 1978 where he had too much to drink and made a choice that cost him everything: a charity gala, a slap, a bruise, and a concrete box that ended a career, a life, an entire future.